Hi there and welcome to this Ansible tutorial for beginners. If you don't know how to use Ansible, this is a tutorial for you because I'm going to go through everything from scratch. So if you don't know how to use it, you're going to learn everything you need to learn how to use Ansible to get to a point of comfort. If you don't know how to use Ansible, you'll see how to use it, where you can use it, and what you can do with it. So I will put all the notes. If I have any notes, I will put all the notes on this page. Of course, I will provide the link in the description or in the resources, depending on where you're watching it from. If you're watching on Udemy, of course, you'll find it in the resource link. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll find the links in the description. So let's just get started right away. What is Ansible? Ansible is an automation tool. To be specific, it is an agentless automation tool that can be used to configure, deploy, provision remote systems. So what does that mean? Let's say you want to install Nginx, Apache, or even you want to deploy WordPress on a remote server. You want to deploy it like a load balancer in different regions, different server resources in different regions. So instead of going in and installing Nginx on each server, then moving on to the next server, you can use Ansible to automate the entire process. All you'll have to do is on your computer, you'll install Ansible and then create what is called Ansible playbooks. So we're going to see all this. Don't worry about anything you don't understand. You're going to see all this at some point. Then you're going to write a playbook. A playbook is just like a configuration file that tells the remote server what to do. For instance, you can tell it, install Nginx, start Nginx, move something from GitHub, put it here, copy something from this link into this folder. So that's something you can do with Ansible, and you can do it in the Ansible playbooks. Let's look at some terms about Ansible. Ansible is agentless. What does this mean? By being agentless, it means that you don't have to install Ansible on the remote server. On this remote server, all you'll need for Ansible to work and communicate with the remote server, all you need on the remote server is Python. Once you install Python on each of these servers, Ansible can communicate with these servers and give them the directives to make them do something, maybe install something, update something, and so on. Other automation tools will usually require that you have an agent on the server to enable communication with the automation tool. But for Ansible, all you have to do on the remote server is have Python installed and make sure you have some form of SSH, because Ansible, especially with Linux, will usually communicate via SSH. So as long as you have SSH installed, SSH running on your remote server, and you have Python installed on the remote server, then you can automatically deploy anything within it. You can automate any tasks within that resource. So I'm going to assume you know what it means to be agentless. And where you're going to run it is called the control node. Now the control node is where Ansible is installed, and this is where it will run the Ansible playbooks, Ansible roles. Let's just call them configuration files. The Ansible configuration files are written in YAML. So these configuration files are what you're going to use to communicate to the remote resources. So the control node, this is where Ansible is installed. And this could be your computer. It could be a server. You can even install it on a virtual machine and just use that for deploying resource, for running Ansible and automating different tasks using that virtual machine. So it doesn't have to be your local computer, but usually in most cases, you'll probably be working with Ansible on your local computer. And then managed nodes. You need to understand the meaning of managed nodes. Now, a managed node is a resource, the remote system that Ansible automates. Any resource that you add to your inventory files for Ansible to automate something on, that is a managed node. So the control node is where Ansible installed. The managed node is where Ansible will do something on a remote system. And then we have inventory. Now the inventory file, this is a file that has the hosts for all your managed nodes. So if you have database servers, you have web servers, email servers, all of them, you will declare them inside an inventory file, and that's what you're going to see how to do next. You'll put them in an inventory file. Ansible will just pass will pass the inventory file and then do whatever it is directed to do. So Ansible can be used to provision, configure, deploy, among other things. With provisioning, you've probably heard that mostly Terraform is used, but you can use Ansible as well. There are plugins that enable you to use Ansible to provision resources. And by resources, I mean something like AWS servers and any other cloud provider that has an Ansible plugin. All right, so just a recap, what is Ansible? Ansible is an agentless automation tool that is used to automate remote systems. So the remote system, as we said, could be a server. It can even be a router. Anything that can run SSH, you can automate with Ansible. Windows, Linux, all that. And just a recap of this. Control node, we've said this is where Ansible runs. It could be a virtual machine. It could be your local computer. And then the managed nodes, these are the resources that are being manipulated by Ansible. And then inventory, the inventory file, this is where you're going to declare all your hosts. And you can group them in your inventory file. Maybe you have web servers. There's a way you're going to see how to group them. Web servers, mail servers, database servers, you can group them. And when you're running your playbooks, you'll just choose which particular group you want to run Ansible on. And we're going to see that at some point. And the next part is installing Ansible. So to install Ansible, whether you're on a Mac, Windows, or Linux, the first path is you can install Ansible via pip. And of course, if you have Python installed on your machine, you can install Ansible via pip. A second option is for anyone with Linux. Even on Windows, that's what we're going to do. We're going to install Ansible via WSL, and I'm going to install it on Ubuntu. So if you're on a Mac, Windows, and you can install a virtual environment and use that and install Ansible. So there are lots of ways you can get a virtual environment on your system. You can use VirtualBox and install a virtual machine. You can use Vagrant, and I'm going to use Vagrant with Windows as my managed nodes. So of course, I would love to do this tutorial on Linux, but I prefer to use Camtasia to record my videos. I just wanted to answer that in this video. Why, when I'm doing an initial server setup for a Linux system, I use Windows to record sometimes. And that's because of Camtasia. I just prefer to record and edit with Camtasia. Since I'm on Windows, I'm going to install Ubuntu on WSL. If you're on Windows, that's the same path you should take because Ansible doesn't run natively on Windows. If you're on Linux, any Linux distribution, it doesn't matter. You can install Ansible via the package manager, or you can install Python and then install Ansible. So in this case, let's go to WSL. If your WSL is not enabled, just make sure you enable it. You can just do a Google search for how to enable WSL on Windows. It's not a big process nowadays. If you're using the latest updated Windows, then it's not a difficult process. In my case, WSL is already installed. I don't know if I've installed Ubuntu yet because I want to use Ubuntu. I'll just go to the App Store, Windows, Microsoft Store, and I will search for Ubuntu. Let's just do a search and see all the options which are here. We have Ubuntu. Yeah, I will go with 2204. Just click on it. Click on Get. So I have WSL already turned on. So let it download, and then I'm just going to open it like a normal app. And we're going to see what we can do next. So for you to enable WSL on Windows, make sure that virtualization is enabled on your Windows, on your BIOS, I mean. So you can check for virtualization. I'm here on Windows 10. If you go to the task manager, and you look at, is it performance? You look somewhere here, you'll see virtualization enabled. Virtualization enabled. If this is not enabled, you need to go into your BIOS and then enable it. Just Google how to do it for your motherboard, for your specific computer. This needs to be enabled before you can work with WSL successfully. So I'm just going to wait for this to finish downloading, and then we're going to continue after this. Is the installation complete? It says open. Let me open and see if it is complete. enter a new Unix username. So this is like installing Ubuntu. So just give it a username and then give it a password. All right, so there we go. We have a new Ubuntu installation on our Windows. For good usability, let me just increase the font. Let's try 24. There we go. That should be much better. Control L to clear the screen. And then we can continue on from here. So now we have Ubuntu. So let's just see if there are any updates. I'm going to do apt update. Could not lock the file, so I need sudo dash dash. So dash dash is like just rerun what was run last. So this is, instead of retyping the command again, you can just do that and it's going to replace it with the last command we ran. While this is happening, let's come back here. And since I'm on Ubuntu, as I said, there are two ways in which you can install Ansible. The first way, you can use the package manager. You can just do sudo apt install and you'll see that there's an Ansible that will be installed. But the reason why we do this is so that you can get the latest version of Ansible. You can also install it via pip if you have Python installed, and to be specific, install Python 3 because that's what is recent. So install Python 3 and then install pip and then install Ansible. If you don't know how to install pip, there are lots of tutorials online. It is a very simple process. So I will not cover that. Control L to clear the screen. So you can see we have 87 packages can be upgraded, but I'm not going to do that now. Control L to clear the screen. So if I do, what I'm telling you is, even if you don't add the PPA, if I do apt search Ansible, apt search Ansible, you can see that there is an Ansible version 2.10 and Ansible core is at 2.12, but currently the Ansible core that is available is 2.12, 2.15. So you can see this is really not the latest. That's why we add the PPA. Let me just copy this again. So sudo apt update, sudo apt install software properties. I don't know whether these are already installed, but I'm just going to do it again. They're probably not installed already. So I'm just going to install apt software properties common. And then we're going to add the repository for Ansible PPA. So that just gives us the PPA with the latest Ansible, package. So if I run that, it's going to run the apt update and then it's going to install this application. This is going to install this package. And then after that, it's going to add the repository from this PPA of Ansible. Press enter to accept. So it's installing that. Now the PPA has been added. Now let's try and do apt search Ansible again. Let's see if the version is different. So you can see here we are getting 8. In the previous one, Ansible core was 2.12, now it's 2.15. So you can clearly see why you should add the PPA, because it's going to give you the latest version of Ansible core and Ansible. So Ansible core is the original Ansible. That is the Ansible brain. It has everything with Ansible. It has the inner workings of Ansible. Now, Ansible is a compilation of plugins, modules, basically almost everything you'll need to run any environment. You need to automate any environment. That's why you install Ansible. It contains Ansible core. So this is the inner working of Ansible, but Ansible comes with Ansible inner core and a bunch of other plugins and modules that are going to be instrumental in your automation. So once we do this, once we know that we've added the PPA, we do install Ansible. So if you want to follow along with me in this setup, if you are not on Windows, what you can do is, so sudo apt install Ansible will install Ansible. What you can do is just create a virtual environment and then install Ubuntu. You can use VirtualBox if that's the one you want to use. Install VirtualBox. If you're on Windows, you don't need any of that. All you need is WSL. Enable WSL, install Ubuntu, and that's it. So now let's just wait for Ansible to install, and we're going to see the version of Ansible that is installed. So if you prefer to go with the Ansible pip route, there are certain things that will be different, just a location of certain files, but that is really not important because most of the files we're going to use, we're going to create them. For example, the host file, that is the inventory file, we're going to create that. There's a default place for that, but when we get to that point, I'm going to tell you more about it. For now, we just know that Ansible is installed. We can check the Ansible version. All right, there we go. Ansible is now installed in Ubuntu 22.04. And if we do Ansible, I think I copied it. Right click and it will paste on WSL. Our Ansible core is 2.15. So there we go. We have Ansible installed successfully, and it's telling us Python. We're using Python version 3. Ginger, this is a templating engine that is used in Ansible. So this is a templating engine. It's used in even Django. If you install Ansible via Python, some of these locations are going to be different. Especially the executable location will be inside of Python if you install it via pip. This has been kind of a long video, slightly long video, but sometimes in tech, it's very important to understand the theory of things and why we do what we do. In this case, for example, you saw why we add the PPA and also other ways of installing it, even though we only installed it in WSL. So I did go through a few theoretical things that I know will help you understand something. If you had questions about why we do this, we do that, maybe some of those questions were answered in this video. So that's how to install Ansible. In this part, let's just set up our environment, and we're going to use Visual Studio with WSL. And our WSL, currently we have Ubuntu 22.04 installed with Ansible. So usually you'll find, when you look at other tutorials, you'll find that somebody doing the tutorial, they'll just make a directory. Let's call it tut for tutorials. And then inside of this directory, they'll have their files and other directories for their project. We can cd into that directory, and we can create another directory, make dir. So if you want to make a directory without going inside of it multiple times, you can just use something like make dir -p and give the directory a name, and all the subdirectories that you list will be created. In this case, I've already done it this way, so I'll just make another directory and let's call it Ansible. I'll call it Ansible 1 because I don't know how many Ansible tutorials I'm going to do. So inside of that main project, we can even cd inside of it, Ansible. So we're inside of that directory. So usually you'll find if somebody wants to do demonstrations in this tutorial, so you'll probably find that they will create the file, and I don't know whether Vim is installed. Let me just use vi. In our case, let's say we want to create an inventory file. Inventory, and I will use the YAML. No, for now, let me just leave it as that, as an ini file. If it doesn't have an extension, it will be assumed to be ini. So I'm just going to enter. We can enter our hosts inside here. So maybe web. Let me just come here and copy some things because I don't want to type. So we can just assume that this is our inventory file, right? And I'll just remove that. Escape dd will delete that line. And then if I want to save this, Shift ZZ, that will save it as our inventory file. You can see, I mean, you can work on the terminal with all this, but why do this while you can use Visual Studio? So I don't know whether I have WSL for Visual Studio installed. Let me just confirm. But all you need to do is install Visual Studio. Here under apps, come here and search for WSL. WSL. Let's see. Okay, so I've already installed mine. If yours is not installed, click there on install and it will install it. And once you install it, you can open, let's see that. If you click on that, you can open connect to WSL. You can connect to WSL. Let's click there on connect to WSL. So you can see down here, it is starting VS Code in WSL Debian. So if you look down here, you're going to see it is starting VS Code in WSL for Debian. And I don't want to use Debian because I'm using Ubuntu for this. So I'm just going to click on it again, and then I can close remote connection. And then I will open remote desktop, remote window again. And then I will click on connect to WSL using distro. So when I click there, I can choose the distro that I want to use, and I want to use Ubuntu 22.04, which is already installed, and it's going to install the server, and this is going to enable me to write my code on Visual Studio Code without having to do everything in the WSL command line. So we're going to see how we can open this file in WSL in Visual Studio, and then we can start writing our code. Once the installation for the server is complete, for the WSL server is complete, you can come in here and you can open any file inside of your Ubuntu, Debian, whichever distro you're running in WSL. WSL has downloaded the server, and now we just need to update now. Let's update it now, and that's going to restart VS Code. And now we are in the remote environment. So you can see it's still starting VS Code in WSL mode. Okay, there we go. So everything is running WSL Ubuntu. If you look at this highlight down here, you'll see WSL Ubuntu 22.04. Now it's running. You can open a folder, and if you click to open a folder, it will bring you here. Or you can click show local, and that's going to open your local directory. But we want to open a folder connected to the remote. It will show you everything, all the folders that are currently created. And this is the one that we've just created. This is the one I just created using make directory command. So this is the one I'm going to open. Let me open this one because this will be my root directory. And then click OK. Do you trust the authors? Yes, I trust the authors. And inside there, we have an inventory that we've just created. So if you want to do anything like run something, you can just do it here using the terminal, the integrated terminal. Open in integrated terminal, and we can try Ansible. Ansible inventory -- list. And it's going to list the inventories which are there. Unfortunately, it lists this because we haven't created a CFG file. We're going to create an Ansible configuration file. And the configuration file, we're going to tell it which inventory to use. So in this case, Ansible inventory -- list, we want it to list for our inventory, which is just called inventory. So you use -i to specify the inventory that you want to use. We're going to look at all this in a moment. So this is just an example. So you can see when we do this, it's going to show us all our hosts, and these are the hosts that we currently have in our inventory. So in the next part, let's talk about Ansible configuration. That's actually what we were supposed to do in this part, but I just realized that we needed to use Visual Studio instead of doing everything via the Ubuntu command line here. So now you know how you can set up VS Code with WSL. And if you need to add folders, you can create new folder, new file. You can add a new folder there. Maybe you want your playbooks to be there. You'll put your playbooks in there. And when you create it, if you go to the command line on WSL and you check ls, you should see that your playbooks directory has been created there as well. And even here, if I create another directory, make dir, we can just call it files, enter. It's going to show up here as well in Visual Studio Code. Now you know how you can work with it. If you want to close the connection, you can just click there and you can close remote connection. Let's move on to the next part. And this is going to help us talk about Ansible configuration. So I will do another one, Ansible all -- list hosts. When we do this, we are told that our inventory is empty. If you want to list the hosts for the inventory that we have here, we have to define it explicitly, and we'll have to tell Ansible to use this as the inventory. And when you do that, it's going to list all the hosts that we have in this inventory file, that inventory file. And we're going to look at inventories at some point, but I want to use this as an example of Ansible CFG. So let's talk about Ansible configuration. If you come here, I will put all the links in the description. We are going to talk about the precedence of Ansible configuration. Now, configuration simply allows you to set various settings or various features for Ansible. For example, usually you'll have an ansible.cfg file, and this is a file that you can use to define various things for Ansible. So the default way is for you to use an Ansible CFG, but there are different ways for which you can set Ansible configurations. So the first one is, and this is the one that will always take precedence, so this will override everything else, that is Ansible in the environment variable. If you set an environment variable for Ansible in your shell, then that will always take precedence. So you can set an environment variable here, and that's going to take precedence over all these other configuration files. You can also have your files in Ansible CFG. Now, this in the working directory. So the working directory is where your current files are. So here, where we have this, you can create a file called Ansible.cfg. This is an ini file, rename. Any configurations for Ansible that you put here will override all the configurations that you have in the Ansible CFG in the home directory. Let's just confirm if we have an Ansible in the home directory. For this, let me just come back here, and I will cd without anything. That's going to take me to the home directory, and I'm going to do ls-la, and here you can see we have Ansible, but we don't have Ansible.cfg. So if you needed to create an Ansible.cfg file, you could create one inside here, and it will override the one that is in etc. I don't know whether I have this. Let me confirm if I have Ansible etc. So this will exist depending on how you installed Ansible. If you installed it via Python pip, you're probably not going to have this directory. So since I installed mine in Ubuntu via WSL, I know I should have it. So I'm just going to do ls-lh control, and then I'm going to paste. And you can see we do have Ansible.cfg inside there. And we can even see what's inside this file. etc. Let's just look at what we have here. So as I said, this is not going to be available for you. You won't have this file if you installed Ansible via pip. So I'm just going to do cut. We can cut the file to see what's inside. And you can see it's just a small file without anything. Right? And we're going to see how we can disable an Ansible configuration file. What is the importance of an Ansible configuration file? You can set up different things for your Ansible. For instance, in my case here, we can set up a default inventory. So you can see I've created this manually, Ansible.cfg, but if I run that configuration, if I run this Ansible config init disabled ansible.config, it's going to create an Ansible configuration with lots of different options you can have for an Ansible configuration file. But since we've set it as disabled, all of them are going to be commented out. If you don't want them commented out, just remove dash dash disabled. And this is going to give you configurations that are not disabled, which is something you don't want because it's going to set those settings for your Ansible. So if I do that, enter, you'll now see that ansible.cfg has all these options that you can have: actions, warnings, true. If there are any warnings, you'll get warnings on the terminal. You can change cowsay settings. You can change cow path. This is just I don't know why people use this package or plugin or module, whatever it is, but it just brings output in form of a cow, as a cow saying something, or any of these other options, bunny saying something, all this. I don't know why people use it, but it's fun apparently. Now you can also set the default root path for Ansible config files on the controller, home-Ansible. All these are settings you can have. So that comments out align, that one as well comments out align. So as I was saying, if you want them to be uncommented, Ansible, I'm just going to copy that and I'm going to delete this. So I can just do Control delete, and that's going to delete that line, that specific word. That's something you can do in your Linux shell. If you want to delete something, you can, maybe you want to delete this entire thing, you don't want to delete it one at a time, you can just do Control D and that's going to delete it. If you want to go to the first line, you can do Control A, that's going to take you to the first line of the line, and I'm going to add an A there. If you want to go to the end, you can do Control E. Is it Control E? Okay, apparently that doesn't work here. Control U. Okay, that also doesn't work here. Control U will undo apparently here. If we do enter, you'll see it has regenerated the file, but this time around it has not commented out all this. So this means that these are the settings for your Ansible. Okay, so you can see this could really affect how your Ansible runs if you remove dash dash disabled. So these are the current settings for your Ansible. Right, so I don't really need to have all this. So I will add it with disabled, or I can just remove the file. rm ansi tab. So rm ansi tab, that's just going to autocomplete Ansible, and I can remove that file. If I want to create it, I can do touch. So Control A takes you to the beginning of the line, Control D deletes that word, and then I can just do touch. And that's going to create an empty ansible.cfg file for me. And now if I want to tell it the inventory to use, let's just go and see the different options that you can have. Okay, so let's go and search for Ansible configuration. Let's click on that. Let's see what options it's going to give me. Configuring Ansible configuration file, environmental configuration. So you can also set your environment variables, and this is going to take precedence over everything else. Okay, so anything you set via the environment variable, that's going to override any configuration you have in your Ansible CFG. Okay, so for more details of full listing of configurations, look at the configuration settings. So when you come here, click on that search results, and it's going to give you all these options. These are the different settings that you can set up in your Ansible. Or something here that I know they usually say and is important: when you create your Ansible configuration here on your computer, make sure that the directory where your ansible.cfg has been created, make sure that that directory doesn't have a world write permission. World write permission simply means that only the user and the group should be able to write to that file. The rest should read, but they shouldn't write. So we can check for that. Currently, it's inside of this directory, Ansible. So if you do ls-lh, let's see. Okay, that's for that. Let me copy this. Select that because I want to see the permissions for this and then explain it a bit. So we are going to do ls-lh for this directory. Okay, let me go back one directory. All right, so for this directory, where our ansible.cfg file is, it needs to be such that the user doesn't have write permissions. So here what you have is, this is the user. The D simply stands for directory. The first D simply means that this is a directory. And then you can see for the user, this is the owner actually. The owner of this file can read, write, execute. And then for the group, the second part is for the group. The group can execute and read. And then the last part, which is the world, which is world or other, this you can see they can only execute. So the permission for that is okay for what Ansible recommends, because if you come here, you'll see they say that your Ansible CHB file should not be in a world writable working directory, right? So make sure that the permissions are set up such that only the user of that file, the owner of the file, can write, execute to that file. And for the group, you can just make it execute and read. For the rest of the world, make sure it's only write. These are the different things that you can set in the Ansible CFG. So that's action warnings, and you saw something about that. If you generate the file, you'll see there was something about action warnings. So just take note of everything here, how to use this documentation. In the ini.cfg, you can add it using action warnings. And then environment, if you are setting up an environment variable, the variable name will be Ansible action warnings. If you're inside the ini.cfg and you want to define this action, that's what you'll use. If you want to define, let's see something else here that you can use. If you want to set up a become file, password file, you'll use this as the name of the variable. So let's come back into VS Code and let's generate the CFG file again, and I'm going to explain it from there. So I'll do Control R and I can search for Ansible. Control R simply just lets you search for something, some command that you had run earlier. So Ansible config, this is the one that I want. This is not the one I want actually. I want the one with disabled, but it doesn't matter because I just want to show the names of the variable. So in this case, I'm just going to use the one which doesn't have dash dash disabled. So when you do Control R, you can search for a previous command that you ran. In this case, I was looking for Ansible config init dash dash disabled, but this one will do. So if I press enter, it's going to run that command again. So if I come here, you can look at action warnings. So that's how it is defined inside of Ansible CFG. Let's look at something else. Force colors, all this. You can see this is how they will be defined. All right. So become password file. If you have to add a directory or something, some path, you can add it like that. Make sure you add quotations for something that has multiple words on it. You add the quotations around it. The thing I wanted to stress here is, if you are looking through the documentation, don't ever get lost. If you want to change the cache plugin for Ansible, the environment variable you'll use in your ini, the variable name you'll use is fact cache. So you'll just write fact cache. Let's say this is the one we want to add, fact caching, and then come back here and maybe you want to add it there. Control V is equals to whatever you want to add there. That's important to know, because if you're using environment variables, you'll use it with that, right? But most cases, you'll probably just define everything inside of Ansible CFG. But if you have to use an environment variable, let me just give you an example of that, because in Shell, even in Kubernetes, when you're doing certain things, you'll always find yourself using environment variable. So to set up environment variables, let's say we want to do it for, let's see something that we'd already seen, which is up here, action warnings. So if you want to use the Linux shell, let's come back. We went all the way down. Let's just come back and scroll to action warnings. If you want to set an environment variable and you want to use the Linux shell for this, you can just copy that name, copy, and to set it in your shell, I can just come in here and I will do export. Ansible action warnings is equals to, in this case, let's say is equals to false. So if we do this and we press enter, and then we echo the current variable, you'll see that it will tell us that it is false. So just remember that if you set up an environment variable, it will override the value that you have in your Ansible file, ansible.cfg file. So you can set up your environment variables here. For simplicity's sake and for better code, put them in your Ansible CFG file. This is easier to maintain and easier to remember. So let's end by defining an inventory file. So here I'm just going to do Control F because I want to find inventory, the inventory environment variable default host list. The key is inventory. If you are to define it in the ini file, you'll just use inventory default host list. If you are to define it in environment variable, you'll use Ansible inventory. And that is usually defined under defaults. You can just add it here. Inventory is equals, if you have a directory, you can even put the name of the directory, the path to the directory. But in this case, I can just use inventory. So inventory for that file. So before I save, let's just run that command again. There's something we ran about Ansible. I'll just do Control R to search for the one we ran about. List hosts. List. This one. Error invalid type configuration option setting default. All right. So before I do anything, let's just delete everything else here. Control X, Control A, Control V, but I will comment this one out. You can comment it out with a semicolon, Control S. All right, so this is what, let me do Control L and then Ansible host list. Now you can see it cannot identify our inventory file. But if we uncomment this, we can let Ansible know where our inventory is. Inventory is equals to that. So I will uncomment and save. And if we run it now, we don't need to tell Ansible where our inventory file is. You remember there's a version we did whereby we used -i to tell it which file to use as an inventory file. So if you have multiple inventories, you can put them in a directory. Let's say we put all of this inside of create a directory. We can call it inventory. Let me just call them inventories. And then I will move this inside here. Move, yes, I'm sure. So when I do this, Control S, let's see, enter, and unable to pass home that as an inventory source. Okay, that's because it doesn't exist. We have inventories. Let's see if I have to explicitly tell it the path. So when I do this, you can see I will have inventories there. So if I come inside of this inventories file and maybe let's duplicate, paste it in there, and let's rename it to inventory 2, right? And then we can change the name of that to web 1, W2, W3, and then we can save. And if we do Ansible list all hosts, it's going to list all the hosts inside there. So you can have multiple inventories, and this is something that Ansible recommends. If you have production servers, you have test servers, staging servers, you can place them in different inventory files for easier management. So in this video, it's kind of a long one, but this is something that you'll find yourself using, and it's important to know how to go about it. Even if you can't find a tutorial to help you, it's important to know where you can go. If you go to the documentation and you need to change a certain value, maybe ginger something, you can just take that, put that in your Ansible CFG file, or if you want to do it using the environment variable, you can use export Ansible that is equals to the value you want for this variable. So that's it for this part. This has been a long one, but I hope it will answer all your questions, all the questions that you have for Ansible configuration. See you next time. See you in the next part. And in the next part, let's start talking about inventories. So we've looked at Ansible configuration. The next part is inventory. Let's begin talking about Ansible inventories, and you're going to see what are these in brackets and why are these like this? Why is everything like this? And can we have different files for our inventory? Let's talk about Ansible inventory. So what is an inventory? An inventory is a list of all your hosts, a list of hosts that Ansible will be working with. Your Ansible inventory file could be in YAML format, or it could be INI. So this is a sample INI file, a sample INI format. And you can see this just lists the different hosts, and this is a way to group them. So these are two servers that are grouped under web server. And then this also is another grouping of DB servers. They've been grouped there. So this is something you can do. You can group your servers, and you can see this one is ungrouped. So this is INI format. If you see any file, inventory file that is like this, that is INI format. In YAML, you can also create a YAML format. Let me bring this out. In YAML, you'll see that the ungrouped host will look like this, and the other grouped ones will be like this. Point is, you can have either a YAML inventory or INI inventory. In most cases, you're going to find that most people just use the INI format, and they only use the YAML format if they're creating dynamic inventories that will be used programmatically at some point, because it's much easier to work programmatically with YAML than it would be to work with an INI inventory. Bring this back there. Let's hide it under that. Default host. So you have a default host. When you install Ansible, you will have a default host file. And you can use this host file, but usually you'll find that you'll just create your own inventory file that you can use. So depending on how you installed Ansible, you may find that this file doesn't exist for you. It may be in a different path. If you installed Ansible via Python pip, then it will be in a different location than someone who installed using apt. And in our setup, we installed it using apt package manager. Come back to the notes, and I told you these notes are available for you. You just go to this link and you can copy any code that you need to copy. So for here, let's check if we have this default inventory file. I will just open up Ubuntu 22.04, our WSL setup. We can open this. We can even open it with Visual Studio Code, Control-Shift-V. So if Control-Shift-V doesn't work for you on your WSL, come here under Settings, Properties, and use Control-Shift-V, enable that. Code etc. That will open that using VS Code. And you can see this is our default inventory. So let's just go through it a bit, and you can see this is a default Ansible hosts file. It should live in that location. So comments begin with that. Blank lines are ignored. Group of hosts are delimited by a header. You can enter host names or IP addresses. A host name or IP can be a member of multiple groups, and we're going to see that as well at some point. So example 1, ungrouped hosts. These are ungrouped hosts. You can see they don't have this at the top. If they have this at the top, it means that they've been grouped as web servers. You have web servers here. You can see that is a host name, that is a host name, and that is an IP address. So you can use either, but just remember, if you're using a host name, then you need to add some DNS records to ensure that this is reachable. Otherwise, just use the IP address. If you have multiple hosts following a pattern, you can specify them like this. So www.001.006, this simply means that www.001.example.com, www.002 up to 006.example.com. And The same is true for this one as well. So that's just another grouping of DB servers. You can group them like that. If you have web servers, DB servers, mail servers, you can group them based on locations. We're going to talk about that in a moment. So that's our default host file. If you installed Ansible using sudo apt install as indicated here, if you installed it using this step, then you can find your host file, your default host file under etc Ansible hosts. You'll find it there. Go back to inventories, come back here. So we've spoken about this. Oh yeah, you can also list your hosts, files, Ansible, all -- list hosts. Now here you'll see that we have Ansible all -- hosts, and then we have the same with a -i inventory file. So the -i tells Ansible which inventory to work with. In this case, if you do this, it's going to go for the default host file. If you're going to work with a default host file, maybe within your project like we're going to do, you can either define the identity of the file, or you can add this path to your Ansible CFG. And I did a long video about Ansible configuration. You can look at that part for Ansible configuration. We're working inside of WSL. If you don't know how to connect WSL and VS Code, go to that last video. Let me just add a new file, and we're just going to call it inventory. We'll just call it inventory. We can open our terminal, open integrated terminal here. We can do Ansible all -- list hosts. So this is going to list our default host items. You can see warning, provided host list is empty, only local host is available. So this is taking that from our default host, and we want to work with that. If you want to work with this, you have to add the identity invent tab, identity of this file -i there, enter, and you can see our host file is empty. It's empty. It's telling us it's empty, so we can add something here. Let's just add some of the samples we had here. We can just add this, copy that into our inventory file, Control V. There we go. That's our inventory file. We have that, and we have these ones. So let me do Control L to clear the screen, and then I will do Ansible all -- list hosts again, and -i means that we're working with this inventory. So it says it is empty. Oh, that's because I have not saved. Control S to save it, and once we save, it should tell us that we have this list of hosts. It will list all the items that are inside our inventory file. So if you want to view them based on these groupings, you can also categorize them based on the groupings. And to do that, you'll use an Ansible CLI tool called Ansible Inventory. Inventory -- graph and -i. We're going to get rid of this -i very soon. Just wait a moment. Inventory, enter. And it's going to show you how they're grouped. Ungrouped, we have one web servers. These are the web servers. DB servers. These are the DB servers. So one step at a time. The next thing, let's get rid of the -i so that we can just know which inventory file we want to work with. In fact, we can put our inventory files in one folder. So I'll drag that inside there, move it. We can even add another one. The one for YAML, you can also do the one for YAML. So we can do inventory2 dot YML. .yml. We can copy some samples for a YAML. So this is the same, defined in a YAML format. So let's come back to VS Code, Control V, Control S, Control S to save. So this is just the same inventory2.yaml. Let's just bring this up again. And for this one -I, we want to use, so we have to go inside of this inventories /. So this is just a path to where your inventory is. So we have to go inside of inventories and we want to work with the second one, YAML. Unable to pass, root stoots YAML is an inventory source. No inventory was passed. So let's see what is the issue here. Okay, it is not inside there. Move it. We were supposed to create it inside there. After moving it, let's just run that again. And let me rename that. Inventory2.yaml. Control L. Right, now you see you can work with a YAML file or you can work with an ini file. So let's say we want to define an inventory source so that we don't have to go through this step all the time of adding -I. In the root directory, you can add what is called Ansible CFG. Ansible.cfg, and you want to define hosts. So sometimes you don't know what you're doing. So you go to Ansible documentation. So just get used to using the documentation to get what you're looking for, because it has everything you want to do. You'll always find the answer in the documentation. Most of the times that is. Ansible configuration. Ansible configuration and configuring Ansible configuration settings. Let's go with this. So I did talk about this extensively in the Ansible CFG part. If you don't remember that, just go and check it. I want to work with hosts. Control F. Let me find inventory. Default host list. So if you want to work with the default host list in your ini configuration, the key is inventory. You can define it also as an environment variable, which I spoke about. But of course, we want to define it inside our Ansible CFG. That is what the ini here stands for. I'll just put there paste inventory is equals, and I will just give it the entire folder, and that is this folder that I created here for inventory. Anything that I add here, if in future I add any inventory here, it will automatically get passed. I'm just going to leave it like that as inventories. Let's see how it's going to deal with this. Control L to remove everything else, and then let's do this and see. L ungrouped. And then again, the problem you're having is just the same problem of me not putting this outside where it's supposed to be. Move it. Ansible.cfg should be in the root, not inside of that directory. And then from here, you're going to get the path, absolute path for that file, for that directory, or any inventory that you want to work with. If you want to add the path there, you have to know your paths, okay? So you see, if you're here, then this path is correct. And if I do that, it should show all our inventory. Let's see what the error. Again, you can see we didn't tell it which part to add this. So this is actually a very important thing, and you don't have to worry how you're going to know where should this be, where should I add that. All this is in the documentation. If I come here, the key was inventory, and I did copy the key, but I did not tell it which section it should use. So this is also very helpful. The documentation has literally everything you need to know to define your Ansible configuration file. So if you want to add any other thing, you can know where it is. The section is in defaults. So we're going to add it inventory under defaults. So let's come back, and we're going to put it at the very top. these are defaults. So under defaults, there are certain things that go under defaults. Maybe you want to use a default SSH key, you want to use a default username, default something. All those you can define under defaults, but you don't have to worry memorizing which items will go under which sections of the Ansible config file, because the documentation has it. At some point, I'm going to show you how to use Ansible docs right here on the terminal to get any information that you want about any element for Ansible. So if we do this again, you'll see that it's going to list all our hosts right here. So it doesn't repeat itself. If you can see, it does not repeat itself. Let's do Control L again. And we're going to do Ansible. Actually, we did use that. Let's just remove this so that it can list hosts. And it's going to list all our hosts as they are. Let's come back here and inventory.yaml. Let's change this to mail 2. Control S. Control L to clear the screen. Run it again. And you can see mail 2. It doesn't repeat itself. So that's a lot we've covered in a short span of time. Let's see if there's more we can cramp in here before I end the video. So coming back here, we have inventory. We've spoken about this types of inventory, ini, YAML. You can list your inventory. And then let's look at host grouping. So we've said something small about host grouping, and we said that in YAML, that's how you list. That's how you group your hosts. You group them like that. And YAML, remember, this is 2 spaces in here. So if you miss any space, you're going to have an error in your YAML formatting. ini, you can see it's pretty easy. Just put them in a square bracket and add the list. You can have the same host on multiple groups. And you can make up a group of other groups, and we're going to see about that in a moment, child grouping. So when you're grouping, Ansible advises that you group them based on what, where, and when. So your resources, you're the one who knows at what stage they are, where they are, or what they're used for. So you think about that when you're grouping your hosts. For instance, if you have web servers, under what, you can group them as web servers, DB servers, load balancers, mail servers, and so on. Where are these hosts? If you have hosts in different regions, you can list them like that. Maybe you have some in America, some in Europe, Asia. You can group them appropriately. And then for when, if a server is for dev, is for development purposes, is for test, is for production, or is for staging. If it is a production server, you can list it under production server. Maybe you have PHP production, Java production. You can have those different groups, and then you can also group those together as one production server. And we're going to see that in a moment, called parent-child grouping. This is pretty self-explanatory. You just group them based on what, where, and when. So that's grouping. That's a way you can group your servers. And then grouping groups. So this is what I'm talking about, child grouping. You can have web servers in London. You can have web servers in Chicago. And then you can group all web servers by combining the 2 different groups. That's what's happening here. And you can see this is how it's done in ini, and this is how it's done in YAML. I'm going to come back here, and I want to be explicit and change them based on what I'm working with. So here I'm going to just work with inventory first. So it's going to work with that. So we can just try it. And you can see it doesn't bring the items that we have for YAML. I'm just going to Control L to clear the screen. And then I want to do that child grouping example. We are down here under parent-child grouping. So here, let's start with this for ini. And I'm just going to copy. Then let's go here under our ini, and we'll remove all these other hosts and just paste in the one that we've taken from those nodes. So here you can see we have an ungrouped one. Mail.example is ungrouped. And then we have web servers in London. There are web servers in Chicago. Then there are DB servers. And then finally, we have here a parent group that is consistent of the web servers in London and web servers in Chicago. So this will create the web servers group. Look at the format. You have to add the word children, and that's going to add these two because these are children of that. This is their parent. Now let's do the Ansible inventory -- graph. So when we do this, it should show us a list of our hosts with the groups. You can see there, we have the one which is ungrouped. We have our DB servers, we have our web servers. And then under web servers, you can see that it consists of web servers in London and web servers in Chicago. Another point I'll make after making an example with YAML. Let's do an example with YAML. And for demonstration purposes, let's say we just want to work with this inventory. YAML. So I will close that. Let's come back and copy the examples we have here from the YAML example. Copy. Ansible inventory 2 for YAML. Control A, delete everything. Control V. So just note that it's very important to know your spacing in YAML, because if you miss any spaces, you're going to get an error. So those are 2 spaces. Those are 2 spaces. And that is the recommended. Even by default, VS Code will usually give it 2. So even if I was to press tab, it will give me 2 spaces. If I go enter, it will take me there, but let's just go there. If I press tab, it will give me 2 by default if I'm working with YAML. If you're working with something else, then it will not give you 2. But by default, if you're working with YAML, it's going to give you 2. And spaces are really not that important. It can actually help you. It can actually help with legibility. So you can add that space. It's not going to affect anything. Just remember that if you have one item, like here you can see we only have an item here and it has not been listed with a key pair value. So that means that you have to end it with that colon. If you miss the colon, you're going to get an error. And we're going to see an example where we have a key and a value. Let's run this example, and this is the same thing as this, okay? It's just the same thing written in YAML format. All of that you can find in the website notes. So here, just the same thing. Web servers group, and then the children for that are these 2 web servers here, are these 2 groups. Okay, so this is a format of how you put it in a YAML inventory file. So let's come here and into VS Code. Terminal down here. I will do Control L and I will run that again. And you can see it is just the same thing. It gives us group, DB servers groups. It has these hosts. And then the web server group consists of the 2 children, which are web servers London and web servers Chicago. The last point I want to make here before we move on to the next item is every item will belong to at least 2 groups. Here, there's a group I have not spoken about, but it exists by default, and it is called the all group. All consists of all the items that Ansible can pass. You can see they all fall under all. Every list, every host you have that Ansible can pass will be defined under all. That is the one group. And then the other group could be ungrouped. You can see in this case, this belongs to ungrouped because it has not been grouped as a DB server or as a web server. And then it can also be all and a custom group that you've created. So every host must belong to at least 2 groups. The first group is all, and every host belongs to all. So that makes sense. And then the second group could either be ungrouped or it could be the other group that you've created. So let's see what's next here. I know there's one thing that we still need to do before we end the video. So grouping groups, we've grouped our groups and we've spoken about that. Now let's move on to the next part, which I believe, let's see if this is the last item here. Yes, this is the last item on inventories. So the video is ending soon. Just bear with me for a little while longer. So host aliases. You can give your hosts aliases. If you have a host, and usually you'll find like AWS host names, they're pretty long. So in most cases, you may want to give them an alias instead of using AWS dot whatever, those many numbers, the IDs. You just use mail. You'll just use it there as mail 0 and it will represent that. Web server, web 1, will represent web1.example.com. If you've used AWS and you've seen the host names that they usually give you by default, you know what I mean. Sometimes you may want to just use the alias for the host name. And to do it, this is how you do it. Ungrouped, here we have mail0 as the host name, and then we define the Ansible host is equals to that, and then web servers. Web server 1, Ansible host, we've defined it as web1. The second one, Ansible host, we've defined it as that. And then coming to YAML, ungrouped hosts under mail.0 will be the host alias, and then Ansible host, we define it as that. So take note of this, take note of the colon. This is what I was telling you. If you have a colon, so the key and the pair, you don't have to put anything at the end. But if you only have one item, always make sure you end it with a colon. That is in YAML. If you don't, it's going to give you an error. So let's come back here to the notes and copy some things. So host aliases, you can come here and read the notes that I added here. So I'm just going to do the YAML one because the INI one is pretty easy. Look at it, very easy, right? You can do this as an example for yourself. Let's come back to our YAML inventory. And I'm going to Control A, Control V. So you can see we have the ungrouped group. And under this, we have one host. And the host alias will be Ansible host mail example.com. So web servers, here you can see the hosts that we have. We have web1 alias for that, and then web2 alias for that. And you can add another one. So your homework is to add more. Add another group here for DB servers. Use this example that we used here to add another host alias for DB servers. Once we have that, I'll just come down here to the terminal. I'll do Control L, and then I will do Ansible inventory graph to show me the hosts that we have. And when I do the Ansible graph thing, you'll see that it shows me ungrouped. Why is it showing me ungrouped twice? Oh yeah, that is because the default ungrouped is usually a small letter. And there I am, and here I am giving it a capital letter. So make sure you remember that it is case sensitive. Control S, and then I will Control L to clear the screen, and then I will do this again. And now you see we have one ungrouped, right? So make sure you remember that when you're following along with me. So you'll see we have the host. The host alias is the one that is being shown as the host. Host alias we have there. So you can add another one, and that is your homework or your assignment. Just add DB servers and add the host items that we had, and create an alias for each of them. And make sure that it is successfully recognized and passed as an alias like that. So if you have any question about this, just feel free to let me know. On the other hand, I've also left this untouched. So make sure you're looking at that as an example in the INI format. And make sure you do add the DB servers like I've told you to. Key takeaways here. In YAML, make sure these are 2 spaces. Put everything correctly. 2 spaces there, 2 spaces. If it is only one item, like here, make sure it's ending in a colon. If it has 2 items, and this is the key, and that's the value, make sure you have that. And this is important. Don't leave out the space. If you leave out that space, that is an error introduced. And I'm just going to do Control S, and you'll see that now suddenly things are not working fine. So I'm going to do Control L, and you'll see this error. You'll see this error failed to pass it. Found a problem here, right? That is important. Make sure you have a space for the key right there. So what have we looked at in this video? Let's just do a quick summary. We'll come back here. So we've spoken about inventories. We have said that we have INI inventory, YAML inventory, and you've seen how to work with them. We've said that there's a default Ansible host file that comes with Ansible, whether you install it via Python pip, or you install it via the package manager like I did in the previous part, you'll have a default Ansible host file. However, the location for that file may be different depending on how you installed it. If you install it via the package manager, of course, you have access to the etc directory, and you'll find the host file in there. And then host grouping, you can group your hosts based on what is the server for. Is it a web server, DB server, and so on? Where is the server located? It could be in Chicago, London, it could be in the US, Europe, wherever the server is. And then what is the stage of this server? If the server is currently a dev, test, or production server, you can group the different servers as so. And then you can group your groups. So if you have a group of web servers in London, a group of web servers in Chicago, you can create a web servers group derived from web servers in London and web servers in Chicago. And make sure that you add children there. That is a format. Don't forget that. You add that to reflect that these are children groups of this. This way, someone won't confuse this as host names or host aliases. And then here, you can do the same in a YAML format. And then host aliases, we've said if the host name is too long or you just want to give them host names, then you can do aliases for your host names. In this case, mail for INI file, the host is that, and this is a format for that in INI, and this is a format for that in a YAML inventory. So ungrouped, remember this is a small u because Ansible is case sensitive. That pretty much ends this video about Ansible inventories. If you have any question about this, you can always look at the documentation, or first off, you can ask me any question that you have. I will see how to assist you. The next part, we'll see how we can set up some Vagrant managed nodes. All right, that's it for this video. If you have any question, feel free to let me know. Feel free to use the Ansible documentation because everything you want to know is already there.